byproduct of 2,4,5-T. T was the main ingredient in Agent Orange, the defoliant used by the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. During the war, 40 million liters of Agent Orange, containing 400 kilograms of pure dioxin, were sprayed on trees in southern Vietnam. 3 million people were contaminated, including thousands of American soldiers. Even some 40 years after the end of the war, dioxin continues to claim more victims. We know today that this poison provokes cancer and serious genetic malfunctions. In 1978, while American Vietnam veterans were suing the makers of Agent Orange, Monsanto sponsored studies on the long-term effects of dioxin. The company paid scientists to compare the health of workers who had been exposed during the nitro plants accident 30 years prior to the health of non-exposed workers. There are two experts on the subject. William Sanjour, who led the Toxic Waste Division of the Environmental Protection Agency, and Gerson Smoger, a lawyer who represents Vietnam veterans.
In 1990, Dr. Kate Jenkins, a colleague of mine at EPA, wrote a memorandum pointing out that allegations had been made that those studies, some of those studies that Monsanto had conducted were flawed. And if they were done correctly, would have reached just the opposite result of that Monsanto had. The Monsanto studies showed that dioxin was not a human carcinogen.
Well, that means they had the data first, and then they manipulated how they were going to look at that data to come up with the conclusion they want. It's absolutely, you never do a study that way, never. And they did it absolutely wrong, and they achieved what they wanted. And it came out later that there were people that had cancer that in one of these two studies were listed as being exposed to dioxin. And the same 5 people in another study were listed as not being exposed. When you put all these cancers into the unexposed, then it looked like the unexposed people were getting as much cancer as the exposed. And they said, look, there's no difference. See, they're the same.
So then thousands of veterans were disallowed benefits because of exposure to Agent Orange.
So all policy was affected by those studies for 7 to 9 years in this country.
Being a good scientist and a good EPA employee, and someone, by the way, who was quite fearless, Kate Jenkins wrote a memorandum to the EPA Science Advisory Board asking them to review these 2 studies to see if they were correctly done. The fact is, there was no investigation of Monsanto. It didn't exist. Nobody investigated those studies. Nobody, period. What they investigated was Kate Jenkins, the whistleblower. They made her life a hell. They harassed her. They changed her jobs. They persecuted the poor woman.
If you think of Monsanto today, they are telling that GMOs, for instance, are sound and safe. Do you trust the company?
I wouldn't believe the word that company says, nothing. I might trust some independent source who investigated their claims, depending on who that independent source was and how good they are and how independent they are.
Precisely. In order to prove the safety of Roundup Ready soybeans, Monsanto carried out a study which was published in 1996 in a well-respected scientific journal. The study was supposed to assess the effects of GM soybeans on animal health, specifically on rats. This study was thoroughly reviewed by both a Danish scientist, now deceased, and the Norwegian specialist Ian Prime.
I'm afraid to say, value this study very poorly indeed. It's very disappointing, very disappointing. Especially because this paper sort of served as a basis for the whole principle of substantial equivalence. I can just cite, which is again a bit surprising, although the animal feeding studies provide some reassurance that no major changes occurred. Now, some reassurance, now that's not good enough. I want 100% reassurance, not just some reassurance. They talk, for example, about the, on page 723, except for the darker brown colour, livers appeared normal at necropsy. I mean, you can't do that without looking inside. You have to look at the content inside the liver, taking sections, showing under the microscope that there is no difference. They've used, for example, older rats. Obviously, again, if you want to avoid any problems, okay, use an adult. But if you want to see if any changes are evident, then you should use younger individuals, of course. In some ways, you can say it's bad science because a lot of the data that they should have shown isn't shown.
But did you try, for instance, to get access to the raw data?
I didn't. A colleague of mine did, and spent quite a frustrating length of time going through different offices and so on. But finally, the answer was the answer was no. If there was nothing to hide, then there should be no problem. You should be willing to distribute your material for anybody to do work on. And when you keep it tight, then you suspect that there's why is this the case?
One thing is sure, thanks to this limited study, Monsanto's GMOs have inundated the world, principally in North and South America, Asia, and Australia. After only 10 years, transgenic crops now cover 250 million acres. 70% are Roundup resistant, and 30% have been genetically modified to produce an insecticide called BT. Since 2001, the company has published a yearly document titled The Pledge Report, a kind of ethics statement in which Monsanto tries to justify its business practices. At the heart of the opposition to GMOs is the subject of patents. This is what Monsanto calls their intellectual property, which are supposed to protect their investment. In North America, every farmer who buys bioengineered seeds must sign a technology agreement in which the farmer promises to respect the company's patent on the modified gene.
Biotech crops are protected by U.S. patent law, and so I may not in any way save seed to replant the following year. It's something that is a protection for Monsanto, for biotech companies, because they literally invest millions and millions of dollars to produce this new technology.
And how can Monsanto know that someone, for instance, replant harvested seeds?
I'm not sure how to answer that. No, how they would know if someone replanted seed. That's a good question for Monsanto.
The question is so touchy that Monsanto prefers to circumvent it by making glorious promises. In cases of unintended appearance of our proprietary varieties on a farmer's field, we will surely work to resolve the matter to the satisfaction of both the farmer and Monsanto. The reality seems much less idyllic. The Center for Food Safety in Washington, D.C. published a study on farmers sued by Monsanto for having not respected its seed patents. It found at least 100 lawsuits and many bankruptcies. Among the victims, Troy Rush, an Indiana farmer.
Our story starts back in 1999. A gentleman, and I use that term loosely, showed up at my mother and father's farm, and he claimed to be a private investigator hired by Monsanto. And he was out investigating farmers saving their own seed, and asked us, he'd come right out and ask us if we'd saved their seed, and we told him no, we had not, and offered up our herbicide purchases and seed purchases, all the receipts and everything. Told him where everything was purchased so he could go check it out for himself. He declined that offer, and what occurred is then they sued us. Monsanto filed a lawsuit against myself, my father, and my two brothers. And Monsanto presented us with documents that they claimed were samples taken from our farms. To obtain those samples, Monsanto had to have trespassed upon our land without our permission and stole those samples. That year, I recall we had 492 acres of Roundup Ready soybeans. And they were growing under contract for a company for seed. And the contract was very specific. It spelled out the specific fields, so it wasn't a problem in isolating those fields. Everybody knew it.
And why did you settle out of court with Monsanto?
Well, after 2.5 years of this, the family was just destroyed. The stress involved in this, I mean, they're in essence threatening 5 generations of work. And if they would to prevail in something like this, it's all gone. They take it all away. They take it all away.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
How are you this morning, Troy?
I'm well. How are you, David?
Still surviving?
Good.
Troy Rausch and David Runyon grow conventional soybeans. They have been victims of the so-called gene police. Created by Monsanto to enforce its law in the fields, the gene police sow fear in rural America, where farmers denounce the totalitarian methods used in a GMO-dominated world.
I have some pictures here for you, Troy, I'd like you to look at.
Okay.
Here's what I have done, Troy, to help prevent re-entry on my farm of anyone coming onto my farm. Summer, it was in July of 2003, and they came, it was the latter part of July, they came to my house. It was like 7 p.m.
Who came?
Monsanto employees. And they presented me a business card. And they asked me a few questions about the kind of soybeans I plant, the kind of corn I plant, where I market my crops. And so I said, okay, that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah, patents have changed. They've changed everything.
It revolves with a relationship of trust with neighbors. That is gone. Myself, I probably only have 2 farmers that I talk to that are close to me.
Are they really afraid, the farmers?
Of course they're afraid. You can't defend yourself against these people. They've created a little industry that serves no other purpose than to wreck farmers' lives. Of course they're afraid.
Does it mean that you're afraid, for instance, that a neighbor can snitch on you?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
All you have to do is
Dial 1-800.
dial 1-800 Monsanto. Or no, I'm sorry, 1-800 Roundup. I remember encouraging farmers to call this toll-free number and turn their neighbor in.
And why does Monsanto do that?
Well, the reason they do it is control.
Seeds?
Yeah. They want to control the seed. They want to own life. I mean, this is the building blocks of food we're talking about. They are in the process of owning food. All food.
Between 1995 and 2005, Monsanto acquired over 50 seed companies throughout the world. These companies produce corn, cotton, wheat, and soybean, and also seeds for tomatoes, potatoes, and sorghum. Everywhere, people worry about Monsanto's monopoly, which in the long term threatens to wipe out all non-transgenic varieties. Monsanto doesn't agree and speaks only about the benefits of biotechnology, especially in developing countries like India. Our products provide significant economic benefits to both large and small growers. In many cases, farmers are able to grow higher quality and better yielding crops. India is the world's third largest cotton producer. In 1999, Monsanto acquired Mahiko, the country's leading seed company. 2 years later, the Indian government authorized the sale of BT cotton under the brand name Balgard. It is genetically modified to produce an insecticide which repels bollworms, a cotton parasite.
బోల్గార్డ్తో రాత్రి పగలు రక్షణ
చూశారా బోల్గార్డ్ శక్తి యొక్క వాగ్దానం స్ప్రే తక్కువ లాభం ఎక్కువ
బోల్గార్డ్ ప్రతి విత్తనాలు కాయదురుచు పురుగులతో పోరాడే శక్తి.
Since 2001, Kiran Sakari and Abdul Gayam have been closely following the transgenic cotton grown by small farmers in the Warangal district. Every year, the two agronomists publish a report comparing bioengineered cotton with conventional cotton in terms of yields and production costs. In 2006, the harvest was ravaged by a disease that affects transgenic cotton.
This is a Bolgard field. We can see some of the rhizoctonia affected plants. You see, if you remove the bark of a healthy plant, it won't be like this, like threads. See, it's a classic example of rhizoctonia infestation.
The farmers, they said they have never seen that. And when we were doing our study from 2001, we have noted this disease on very few samples in the BT cotton only. And as the time passed, the spread was seen more and more in the BT fields as well as some non-BT fields also. But I personally feel that there may be some interaction, undesirable interaction between the host plant where the gene was introduced and the gene which is carrying the BT. And that has introduced the weakness in the plant to not to resist this rhizoctonia.
I have seen the website of the Mahiko Monsanto. BT cotton reduces 78% of the pesticide reduction and pesticide consumption, and it gives to 30% better yields. But it's an utter flop. After 90 days, invariably you have to spray for bollworms, even on BT cotton.
How do you explain that so many farmers are buying BT seeds?
See, presently the option is is getting narrower and narrower to the farmer. During the current season, even farmer wanted to go for non-BT. There was no non-BT hybrid seed available in the market.
Today in India, Monsanto controls nearly all of the cottonseed market, forcing the locals to buy its seeds at prices 4 times higher than conventional varieties. Small farmers must turn to moneylenders who charge high interest rates. If the harvest is poor, it means bankruptcy, a vicious circle which is decimating Indian villages.
जी आपल्या इथं आत्महत्या झाली ती कशामुळे झाली?
BT cotton.
अजून काय कारण होतं?
कर्जबाजारी.
वय काय होतं?
25.
हा, ही कन्झ्युम्ड पेस्टिसाइड 1 लिटर पेस्टिसाइड. पहिलं सुसाईड आहे का?
नाही.
जगात किती झाली?
Tragedies like the one we've just witnessed occur 3 times a day in the Vidarbha region, where BT cotton was introduced in 2005. Of course, cotton farmers committing suicide is not new in India, but the GM crops are causing it to skyrocket. However, in this battle that pits David against Goliath, few dare to publicly denounce this international scandal.
This is Vidarbha's rice growing belt. So if you see, the minimum suicides are there. But this is the cotton growing area. The result of the BT cotton is the first year 600 suicides from June 2005 to 2006. Second year, still today, within 6 months, 680 suicides. So It's a disaster.
It's a complete disaster, yes. All these technologies, either it is GM or biotechnology, they're actually making the farmers completely dependent on the market. Because not only that you have to pay more for the seed procurement, but you have to fertilize it. And this very claim that no spraying is required, no pesticide required, is also false.
When Monsanto claims in advertising that GM crops are adapted for small farmers, what do you think it's?
Our experience shows that it is completely false. It's completely false. It's a lie.
On this day in December of 2006, a revolt was brewing in the largest cotton market in the state of Maharashtra. 3 days later, riots broke out and dozens of small farmers, including Kishore Tiwari, were arrested.
बहुत कम भाव में ले रहे माल और काश्तकार करके परेशान हो रहे.
तुमचं किती आहे बेटा कर्ज? 32,000 rupees a day. तुमचं 60,000 rupees a day. तुमचं 50,000 rupees a day. 20,000 rupees a day. 50,000 rupees a day. 15,000 rupees a day. किती लोकांना बीटी लावायचं नाही पुढच्या हातवर? सर्व. They don't want to go for the BT.
Seeds of Suicide is the title of a book by physicist Vandana Shiva. She won the Alternative Nobel Prize and heads the Navdana organization, which aims to conserve traditional seeds. In the beginning, Vandana Shiva's battle was against the first Green Revolution, which brought industrial agriculture to India in the 1960s. Today, she denounces what she calls the second Green Revolution, that of GMOs protected by patents.
The difference is that the first Green Revolution was public sector driven. It was driven by government agencies. The government agencies control the research. In the case of the second Green Revolution, it is driven by Monsanto. It is a Monsanto-driven revolution. The second big difference is that the first Green Revolution did have a hidden objective of selling more chemicals. But its first objective was providing food. It was food security. And yes, they grew less pulses, they grew less oilseeds, but they did grow more rice and wheat. It fed people. The second Green Revolution has nothing to do with food security. It's not about food security. It is about returns to Monsanto's profits. That's all it is about. They've always said genetic engineering is the way to get to patenting, but patenting is the real aim. If you look at Monsanto's research agenda, they are testing at this point something like 20 crops with Bt genes in them. There's nothing they're leaving untouched. The mustard, the okra, the brinjal, the rice, the cauliflower. Once they have established the norm that seed can be owned as their property, royalties can be collected, we will depend on them for every seed we grow, of every crop we grow. If they control seed, they control food. They know it. It's strategic. It's more powerful than bombs. It's more powerful than guns. This is the best way to control the populations of the world.
Monsanto responds to Ms. Shiva's persuasive argument by brandishing its pledge: integrity, dialogue, transparency, and sharing.
We want to participate constructively in the process by which societies around the world try to develop good answers to those questions. Are the products going to be safe for the environment? How are they going to affect biodiversity? How are they going to affect other plants and insects and birds? What about outcrossing of genes? What happens if genes do outcross into wild species? To me, that means, among other things, listening carefully and respectfully to all points of view.
Despite Robert Shapiro's placid demeanor, he has just touched on a subject that greatly troubles GMO opponents, transgenic contamination, which Monsanto prefers to call an adventitious presence that's part of the natural order. According to a study led by Berkeley professor Dr. Ignacio Chapela, GMOs have already contaminated Mexican corn. But when the scientific journal Nature published the study's findings, it triggered a violent controversy.
I had been working for 15 years with indigenous communities in Oaxaca, in Mexico, and they had been developing the capacity to analyze their environment themselves. One of my students went to try and train people to detect transgenics. We brought with ourselves a positive control. That was a can of corn from the US that we knew was transgenic. And we were looking for a negative control. And we thought the best negative control is going to be corn from the local places, because we all believed that was the cleanest, the most well-preserved source of corn in the world. So the surprise came when we looked at these samples and we discovered that the samples that we all believed would be non-transgenic had already transgenic DNA within them. It was a very big surprise for us to discover that these land races of corn that were kept by people locally and supposedly maintained over 10,000 years had already been reached by transgenic contamination, mostly from the US.
Mexico is the center of origin for corn. More than 150 local corn varieties can be found in just the southern region of Oaxaca. This extensive biodiversity is a treasure, the world's genetic reservoir of corn. Millions of Mexican farmers have maintained it for thousands of years.
This corn is for the family?
Yes, only for the family. We use it to make tortillas. This year is a good size, so we'll save it as seed for next year's planting.
You don't buy your seeds?
No.
You exchange them?
Yes, it's our ancient barter system.
To preserve its corn's diversity, Mexico has banned genetically modified crops. However, due to the NAFTA free trade agreement it signed with the United States and Canada, Mexico cannot stop the massive importation of American corn, 40% of which is genetically modified. This industrial corn, as it's called in Mexico, is highly subsidized by the U.S. government. So on local markets, it costs half as much as traditional Mexican corn.
Do you always make your tortillas with local corn?
Yes.
It's natural and has a better yield. Also, it's more nourishing because it comes from pure soil. That's blue corn. In the past, my ancestors only planted this kind of corn. Today, we maintain it as well.
It existed before the Spanish conquest?
Yes. There's another kind of conquest.
What's a new conquest?
It's the transgenic conquest that wants to destroy everything by making local corn disappear so that their industrial corn can dominate. If they succeed, we'll be dependent on multinationals. We'll be forced to buy the fertilizer and insecticides they sell, because without them, their corn won't grow. Whereas the local corn grows very well without fertilizer or herbicide. Look at it. It's very beautiful.
Ignacio Chapela's article provoked